Okay, I want to make a video about why I think that Autotune is nonsensical for vocalists, and a lot of it comes back to two things. Everyone knows Wings of Pegasus, right? One of the best channels on YouTube. He is investigating Autotune usage. Today, I saw a video. He's actually investigating if the Eagles are actually singing live these days, which was a little bit of that one's going to explode pretty quick, I think, right? But it just shows that by starting with Autotune and trying to investigate these things, it's a rabbit hole that you can get down. That was one thing. I want to explain a few things, even to his listeners, that I'm not sure. Now he's 10 times as smart as me, and he has way more knowledge with music than me. But I want to explain things in a very specific way that's different from precisely how he has explained things, right? But the other thing is, there's this meme that goes around, and it compares autotune to having frets on your guitar, and how frets are automatically helping you to hit that note. And so I want to break down why that's complete BS. It has nothing to do with the reality of where the instrument came from and why it's like that, right? And all of the complexities that come out of that, right? So, yeah, so fretted instruments go back quite a long time. Like, apparently, the early lutes were fretless, but they did start to have frets. I'm gonna say like well over 1,000 years ago, I think, right? Um, and we have to think why why would you introduce frets for some string instruments and not for others, right? And I'm going to try to explain to you right now why you would. So think about the violin. The violin is not really something that you strum. It is something that you may pluck, and you also have a bow where you may hit typically 1 to 2 strings at a time, right? And so while you're playing, let's say this was a violin instead of a guitar, and you're playing an interval, right? You're only having to worry typically about a few notes there. Whereas with the guitar, you have 6 strings. And the main purpose of the guitar is not to do solos. I know everyone's obsessed with solos, but the main purpose is to be able to use any number of strings in order to provide rich harmonies, right? Oh, I'm out of tune. Let me tune up and be right back. Okay, sorry about that. What's actually happening is that I've picked up my guitar from cold, tuned it, played it for a bit, did some talking as the guitar is warming up in my hands, and the strings are warming up because the heat turned on, and then everything's out of tune. So hopefully it's a bit better. I think I'll live with it. But yeah, the point is, you've got your guitar and you are trying to play any number of strings, because what the instruments, the old acoustic guitars and the lutes and stuff like that, were for traveling musicians playing folk music essentially of the time, and they were accompanying themselves with the instrument, so they have to be able to play essentially chords, right? Now, you saw that I'm flying around a little bit here. These are all basic major and minor chords. But the point is that you have to be able to quickly move around and be able to hit a chord. If the frets were not here, you would have to be positioning your fingers very precisely across all 6 strings, and you would be prevented from playing anything very quickly or anything very complex, because you're going to be off by enough what we call cents in the modern, as we talk about modern music, the cents being 1/100th of the distance, right? You're going to be off by enough cents that it's going to sound out of tune, right? So that's why frets exist in a guitar, right? Whereas on a violin, and then you have your cello and you have your double bass and the viola da gamba, all this stuff are fretless instruments, and the reason for that is that you're not doing a strumming style of music, right? So you can focus on one or two notes at a time, and you can get your positioning correct. But what I want to say about this is that this introduced huge problems for music mathematically. Another example of where this huge problem exists, because if you think about this, these notes are fixed now. There's a fret there. You can't move it up and down. Like, I know there is technology, and we will get into that, where you can change the pitch. And of course, you can bend the notes up, but you can't bend them down, right? You can't lower a note on a basic guitar, but we'll talk about that. But you're kind of limited in the sense that on first strike, typically, you're going to be hitting a specific pitch. Another instrument that is like that is the harp. If you think about the harp, the person is plucking at the strings, and each set of strings is individually tuned, right? And so they are given a certain pitch, right? And out of the harp, we managed to create, quite some time ago, this thing called the harpsichord, which was a harp set inside a box with a set of keys in front where you would hit the key and it would pluck the harp, allowing you to play more quickly than you would typically on a harp, and be able to strike, 10 up to 10 tones at the same time, right? And there was a huge advancement in music there. And of course, the harpsichord, what it lacked was the ability to play softly and loudly, right? Because it's generally, no matter how hard you hit it, it was just plucking the strings. Developed into what we now call the piano, which the original name was the pianoforte, which meant it could play quietly and loudly depending on how hard you hit the strings. But all of this is built on a harp. There's a harp in there, and everything is tuned very precisely to and individually, much like a fretted instrument is. And it makes it very different from a violin, right? Or a viola, right? And here's the problem that happens when you have instruments where the tuning is that precise and you can't change any of the notes. The old Pythagorean math that was used to build scales causes you to sound completely out of tune once you move away from whichever key that instrument is tuned for. So if the instrument is tuned for C, if you're playing an F and G or C, everything is going to sound good enough. You're not going to be off by enough what we call cents today that people are going to be like, oh, this is kind of annoying, it's out of tune, I don't like it. But if you suddenly play in G flat or B or D flat, which are way far away, what happens is enough notes sound out of tune that it's a mess and no one wants to hear it, right? And so in order to support things like instruments that are based on harps and fretted instruments, the scale was changed. And I'm not going to get into the math too much, but the Pythagorean method was based on integers, okay? And it was very natural, okay? And the perfect fifth is like a 3-to-2 ratio, right? So it's pretty basic. But what happens with equal temperament so that you can play in every single key on a fretted instrument and on any keyboard instrument is they take the perfect fifth, which on the guitar is this. That's your perfect fifth. If you start from A and you go to E, it's a perfect fifth. Now, a lot of modern music uses chords called power chords that are based on only the root and the fifth, like I just played. They may double it up across some of the chords that they're playing to make it even louder, but it's based on that. And I'll get back to that near the end, why power chords become so common and why they become so popular, right? But anyway, in order to build the equal temperament that we have today, what they do is they take what they call 2 cents approximately off of that perfect fifth. They lower it by 2 cents so that as you go through the circle of fifths, everything is equally divided apart. And when you tune to any key on a fretted instrument or on a piano, you can then play in any key without it sounding too dissonant and out of tune, right? Um, so that's what had to happen in order to allow this. But if you have a string quartet with all fretless instruments, none of this is required at all. You can stick to that because you can adjust every single note based on your hand position, right? Um, so there's absolutely no need. But in order to have a fretted instrument or a keyboard instrument, you absolutely need this. And one of the other things that happens is that in the old Pythagorean theory, things like a C sharp and a D flat are two different notes. In our modern theory, it's the same note. So these are all compromises that we make in order to support these instruments. So where am I going with this? Okay, vocals. Vocals. Are vocals like a piano keyboard? Are vocals like a fretted instrument such that when you sing A, you just want to sing A? Or do you want the full gambit of what you get? I don't know if gambit's the right word. Of what you get when you're playing a violin. Like you can add vibrato on a guitar. I'm not very good at it. Actually, that's not a good place for me to do it. Right? And you have to add vibrato on a violin, otherwise it just sounds like noise, right? The vibrato is what gives it depth, right? So there's vibrato, but also you have that full range from one note or pitch to the next. You have that full range that you can explore. Much like the human voice. The human voice does not need frets. And it's not built like a harp, right? But there is this obsession that we should be landing directly on notes. And the fact is this: you can be off by upwards of 4 to 5 cents when you're singing live. And no one's going to bat an eye. It's not that important. Now, if someone absolutely can't sing, yes, Autotune can actually make it so that it's possible, but what's the point, right? But the problem is that we're using, much like Phil says, we're using Autotune on people who can sing. So there's no reason to use it, and it's making the music sound more and more robotic, right? So it's pointless. And it's this problem. I talk about producers a lot, how they get in the way of the artists a lot of times. I think there are a lot of artists that play live and that are also in the studio that don't want Autotune. But somehow it's out of their hands and it's being used all the time. And it's turning their voice. Now, it doesn't exactly turn their voice into a fretted instrument, because what it generally does is it locks into a note, but it keeps any vibrato in there as well, right? So it sounds like they're constantly singing in the correct pitch with still some emotion, but it doesn't sound good. Everyone knows it doesn't sound good and it doesn't sound natural. Now, what I wanted to say, I was saying earlier, advancements have been made to a guitar to make it less rigid. And the big change was what we call the whammy bar, and there's the Bigsby and all that stuff. But what that allows you to do is when you're striking a note, if you're pushing down on it, you're going to start lower than the actual note, right? And you can be as precise as you want. And if you pull back, you're sharpening the note, making it higher, right? So here's the point. We are adding all these features to guitars so that they can be more expressive. Yet with vocals, we're saying we want to lock you in to a box. It makes no sense. It goes against all of the advancements that we've had. Let the best vocalists be the best vocalists, much like the best guitarists will be the best guitarists. Doing anything other than that is a strike down against artistry. That's really what it comes down to, and that's what I came here to say today. Is there anything else that I would like to add to that? I don't think there's much more to add. Actually, there were a few things I wanted to add. Now, first of all, I want you to compare the hat that I'm wearing to that Devo album behind me, because it is what I'm just laughing at myself because it inspired me to get this hat. Now, if you look at that Devo record, do you know what that is? That is based on a golf ball package that you could buy in the 70s of Chichi Rodriguez. Now, they changed the face enough because they think they were going to get sued. But that circle was the golf ball, and then Chichi with his hat. And so, you know, that's where my hat came from. And my hat, just so you know, I know, sorry about my ugly head, has a nice pin-up thing inside. Isn't that nice? I love this thing. Okay, so that makes no sense. But what I wanted to add into this video, all right, I had mentioned the power chord earlier. The reason the power chord became popular, I mentioned how the equal temperament scale had changed notes around a little bit. There were slight changes, right? It was equally tempered. And what happens is when you use a lot of distortion, the distortion is based on harmonic distortion is what we call it. And what happens is it sounds closer to the Pythagorean natural scale than it does to the tempered scale. So what happens is when you are playing full chords and applying a bunch of distortion, is you get this dissonance between the natural scale versus the tempered scale, and it sounds like crap. So in order to boost up distortion without providing dissonance, they just avoid the third. So that might not make a lot of sense to anyone, but that's why that happened. And so that's how different things are, right? Things are quite different. The other thing is I'm going to post a video talking about things being off pitch. I'm going to post in the description a video. I think it's My Life by Talk Talk, and the bass is a fretless bass that he is playing. And in many ways, he is way off from hitting the absolute perfect notes on the bass. Does it matter? The song was great. It sounds great. The only reason I noticed was I covered the song on a fretted bass, and I'm like, why am I not hitting the same note as him? And I had to do research and find out, oh, he's playing a fretless bass, so he has the ability to hit any pitch that he wants. I don't. I'm stuck here. But it still sounds great, right? And I would not change that song for the world. So any producer that's going out there and saying, we're going to change what you're doing, they are messing with you. Producers have always been a problem and a benefit, but now they're really getting into a problematic area, in my opinion. But let me close off the video as I was going to do originally. Thank you. I will watch my video again and come back in and add anything that I am reminded of. But that's why I think it's nonsensical. Now, some people say it's being used artistically. Any technology can be used artistically, and I'm not going to say that it shouldn't. But what I'm saying is when you have producers that are forcing it upon performers because they believe that perfection is necessary, they are absolutely wrong. Many of the greatest vocalists were off by several cents on so many notes in a row in some of their best recordings, and we still listen to it. So perfection is not required. I think it's part of the digital age that people think perfection and everything is absolutely necessary. So as soon as we start producing music on a computer, well, we have to use it to make everything perfect. No, it's the faults that make some things the most beautiful. So you're destroying music if you're using it in that way, and I feel sorry for any artist that is being forced to use Autotune because they're being told that you're not going to sell anything unless you use Autotune. I think it's BS. So that's my explanation of it. I hope that makes sense to people and isn't totally out there. But yeah, I'm just talking about music theory, fretted instruments, keyboard instruments, Pythagoras theory, the equal temperament. All of it adds up to this is a stupid idea. Let me know what you think in the comments.